A starter that really needs to inspire some confidence, some key depth, and is this player even going to get a shot to make the team? All that and more as the wheel spins and the training camp preview rolls on. Presented by my friends at DraftKits.co, the best draft boards in the land. Take your fantasy football draft to the next level with a customizable draft board from my friends at DraftKits.co. Check the link in the description down below to find out how you get a discount. Now, without further ado, spin the wheel. Let's talk some football. You spin me right round, baby. Training camp preview right round. Where do we begin? On Irv Smith, a backup tight end for the Houston Texans. I don't know that Irv Smith's got a great shot to make this roster, but he's a little bit of an insurance policy for the Texans in case Luke Lachey, their rookie tight end, doesn't have anything as a late round pick, and in case Brevin Jordan has trouble recovering from his knee injury. We know Cade Stover, we know Dalton Schultz are going to be on this Texans team. It's finding out how many tight ends they're going to keep after those two, and what are they going to need from those tight ends? I have a sneaky suspicion it's tough for Irv Smith to get there, but it also feels like Irv Smith is here in case Brevin Jordan needs a week or two into training camp to get out there and get ready, or the learning curve for Luke Lachey. He's a little bit larger than most, but Irv Smith, a former highly thought of tight end, who was going to be a key focal point for a Minnesota Vikings offense. It never quite turned out that way. The Texans added him in the middle part of last year. He had a couple of nice blocking moments over the course of his time there, but ultimately was a part of a underperforming and poor tight end room for the Houston Texans. They bring him back in the offseason, and he's a factor here in training camp. I can't imagine he is a factor for the roster or even the practice squad as well. So the wheel spins and brings us our next player in the training camp preview. Hello, Luke Lachey. Tight end, back to back. Get us started on this video. Lachey is an interesting character for training camp because this is the type of player that the Houston Texans could keep on the roster this year, could build into him and pour into him and have him be a much more useful and better player in 2026. Lachey's got a little bit of juice to him. At Iowa, he was thought of to be hopefully in the same vein as George Kittle. Was going to be kind of the next type of big-time Iowa tight end, Kittle, Laporta. Like, he was maybe going to go on that track, and he had a really good season, and then an injury popped up. The Iowa offense stinks, and the receiving prowess never really showed up after a solid receiving season his second year with the Hawkeyes, fought through the injury, and there's just been some hiccups to his football career since that solid season and his injury. But he was pretty healthy for the Hawkeyes this past season, and it's tough to show off your receiving prowess when Iowa is a putrid offensive style of offense out there on the football field. But in minicamp, in OTAs, he looked pretty spry. I thought he looked smoother than I expected for a rookie tight end. Now, Lachey's a seventh-round pick, so he's far from guaranteed a spot on this roster. We just talked about Irv Smith. Brevin Jordan is a player that Lachey would have to beat out. And could it be where Cade Stover and Luke Lachey are tight end 2 and tight end 3 of a tight end room going forward for the Texans in the next couple of years? Yeah, that could certainly be the case, but that's more on Lachey having to kind of carve out his spot. I do feel like if Brevin Jordan's ready, Lachey is a nice candidate for, hey, didn't make the roster, put him on the practice squad, stay around the building, learn how this thing goes, and then gets a better crack and a better chance at things next year. If he shows the receiving prowess and he can block really well, and I talked to some people that are diehard Hawkeye fans, and they thought, hey, Lachey probably, as much as people like the blocking, probably has room to still improve as a blocker. If he's a guy that they could trust to go out there and block, remember how bad Dalton Schultz and Cade Stover were blocking last year from a pass blocking standpoint. If he could be the blocker that they trust at the tight end position, that's something that he could carve out that Brevin Jordan's not going to do, Dalton Schultz shouldn't do, and Cade Stover, though I believe it's going to get better, maybe you want to have him just be the run blocker. Lachey could be a pass blocker. Carve out a role here for Luke Lachey, but it's also possible that he just finds himself in a situation where there's too many bodies, not enough room on the roster for an additional tight end, and Lachey is headed to the practice squad for the Houston Texans. The wheel spins. Let's see what it brings us. Offensive lineman Blake Fisher. Fisher is a fascinating player for the Houston Texans. They've got to be better along the offensive line. And he is a guy that's going to get the first crack and starts with a little bit of a lead at being a starter on the offensive line and being a starter at right tackle. And Fisher filled in a couple of times last year, and ultimately the Texans felt confident enough in him to move Titus Howard inside and start Fisher at right tackle. He had a couple of moments where he filled in and didn't look great, filled in for Laramie Tunsil for a moment or two at left tackle. Again, didn't look great. And overall, I would say below average when Fisher was on the field last year. There were a couple of players that were drafted after Blake Fisher that played last season and played better than Fisher. Most notably, the next tackle drafted after Fisher was the Baltimore Ravens' Roger Rosengarten. And Rosengarten locked down the starting right tackle job for the Ravens and actually played pretty darn well. So Nick Caserio, he started that tackle run, and one of the tackles that he didn't draft is much better than the guy that he did draft. But Fisher was thought of in the draft process as a project-type player. He was a type of player that was probably going to need a season of seasoning, a real NFL offseason, then he hits the ground running in year two. Well, the Texans have to hope that is the case for Fisher as they are betting on him and relying on him. Titus Howard has not been a factor in the tackle conversation up to this point. The Texans, yes, they added Ariante Ursery, but he's a rookie. He's going to need to sort of get his feet wet. Fisher's got experience, and if he has played his way into a better start to a season, a much better start to a season than his rookie year, then maybe you can rely on Fisher out there at right tackle. I thought physically from the OTAs and minicamp, he looked better than he did at the end of last year. And as a rookie, that NFL offseason did his body well. He struggled a little bit with speed, both as a rookie and in the OTAs and minicamp, but it's tough to really get in there as an offensive lineman in some of the offseason workouts. So you're not going to judge him too harshly on that. But Fisher is a precarious and tenuous player if he doesn't work out. They've got options to replace him on the offensive line with Ariante Ursery could maybe start over him. Zach Thomas is a player that's in the building that could play there. And even Titus Howard bumping back out to right tackle and somebody else playing right guard in Howard's move to right tackle. There are options if Fisher doesn't work out, but it would be really important for Nick Caserio that one of these offensive line selections that he makes hits, especially a guy that he used a second-round pick on at tackle when there's a little bit less variability to that type of player. You know, you draft a second-round center or guard, maybe there's some more variables, but when you invest in a tackle that should be a tentpole piece of your offensive line, you really need him to pay off, and the Texans need that tackle to pay off for them here in 2025. And if Fisher's not out there, man, it feels like a wasted 2024 draft pick that could have been invested or used somewhere else to help the Houston Texans, because it's not like Fisher was amazing last year as a rookie. And if he gets beat out in training camp, that's not good. I have a hunch he's got enough to start at right tackle in the 2025 season. I just don't know if he's got enough to keep the challengers for his spot at bay, but that's a conversation after the season starts. I feel like he has enough to keep that job here in the training camp, which is just a few days away. Boy, I can't wait. I know you're excited. I'm excited for it as well. It's going to be a blast. Get out there. Justin Watson, a veteran wide receiver that the Texans added in free agency, previously played for the Kansas City Chiefs and spent some time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as well. And Watson is a depth piece at the wide receiver position. Now, D'Amico Ryans has had plenty of praise for Justin Watson this offseason. He called him one of the most consistent wide receivers in all of football. He also said that Watson was a player that in offseason workouts had impressed him. And this is a guy that's going to factor in to the wide receiver room as much as he needs to factor in. And here's what I mean by that. If it takes a moment for Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel to get their bearings and figure out how to be an NFL wide receiver, you've got a veteran who's been around the block like Justin Watson to play some of those snaps with Christian Kirk opposite Nico Collins. And if Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel take to in the NFL wide receiver spot like a fish to water, then you've just got Justin Watson in a break glass in case of emergency situation. As much as you need Justin Watson on this team, that's what he's here for the Houston Texans. They didn't bring him in to be the third wide receiver, but if you need him to be the third wide receiver while Higgins and Noel figure it out, he can do that. If you just need him to be a steady veteran at the back part of the depth chart, that's probably the role that he is best suited to play. I do feel like with the way that the Texans have talked about him this offseason, he's got a pretty good lock on a spot in that wide receiver room. And then you start to kind of think about how him being on the team maybe affects other guys' chances to make the team. This is not a player that you really want to see on the field a bunch. He's not going to have like a Noah Brown impact. Remember a couple of years ago when all of a sudden randomly Noah Brown would have a big game, and heck, the Texans won 3-4 games because of Noah Brown's impact in those games. He doesn't have that type of potential, but on a random day, could he give you 4 and 56 and move the chains a couple times? Yeah, sure. And again, as you need him, you use him. If you have to use him a lot, that's not good. If you don't have to really use him at all, there you go. Justin Watson, just a veteran, reliable, high floor, maybe low ceiling type of player for that back part of the wide receiver depth chart for the Houston Texans. And just a guy that you can see have some nice moments in training camp, and then hopefully the rookies keep him over on the bench when the regular season gets here. That's what I expect and hope out of Justin Watson. And if he gets on the field, hey, you can trust him to go out there and make a couple plays and maybe not fall down when you try to throw him the football like the Texans had some players last year. Jawar Jordan next up on the wheel. Man, last year I was really excited about what Jawar Jordan could bring to the table. He was a player that a lot of draft nicks expected to contribute to a Shanahan-styled offense, to a zone-running offense, and it just never really got to the contribution level for Jawar Jordan last year. There was some decent competition. Damian Pierce, Dare Agumbawale, the Texans added Cam Akers, and he had a good camp. British Brooks had a good camp playing kind of running back, kind of fullback, kind of tight end, whatever you want to say. He didn't. And Jawar Jordan a little dinged up, and he was off the practice squad. He's on the practice squad. Ultimately, he's getting another crack at this thing for the Houston Texans. And there's a few different ways that Jawar Jordan can impact the Texans and hopefully find himself a roster spot, or at the very least, another opportunity with this team on the practice squad. The first is he's got to be really good on special teams when he gets those opportunities. From a kickoff return standpoint, if he can go out there and affect the game that way, he can get some things done in the preseason with those opportunities. He's got to go out there and do that. He's got to pick up this new offense really fast, and he's got to be a guy that they can trust on this new offense when they do put him out there with whoever he's on the field with. Maybe he gets a snap with C.J. Stroud in training camp. Maybe he's only getting snaps with Keaton Slovis and Davis Mills and Graham Mertz in training camp. But he's got to pick up the offense and be a guy that the Texans can trust and put out there with confidence that he knows what to do and he can make good reads on the field with the football. And then he can go out there and showcase some of that speed that I know the 40 time, and he claimed that the 40 time, well, he wasn't feeling good and this and that. 40 time wasn't great. When he was at Louisville, he had some jets. He would turn them on every now and then. So I have to showcase the speed. But a thing that I liked from Jawar Jordan, I saw it a couple times in OTAs and minicamp, was Jawar Jordan can catch the football and make some things happen with the ball in his hands as a receiver. He had a really nice play in one of the offseason workouts where he caught the ball about 6 or 7 yards out of the end zone, made a nice cut to get open, made a nice cut to find himself in the end zone. So catching the ball out of the backfield, you start to kind of stack up the jobs for Jawar Jordan. Okay, catches the ball out of the backfield. That's something that's a big positive for him. He has maybe some special teams usefulness. That's a positive for him. He's a runner that maybe you start to trust that you can hand the ball to. That's a positive. And those positives start to stack up, and you kind of see how he has a role in this organization if indeed Jawar Jordan could carve himself out a spot for himself in the organization. He's going to have to be good at all of those different roles. Let's see what the wheel has for us this time here. From running back to defensive end. Now, Danico Autry is a little bit of a forgotten player for this Houston Texans team. And here's why I say that. Sometimes I forget Danico Autry's on this team. Now, he was a big offseason addition for the Texans last offseason. He was a productive player that had a lot of success for the Tennessee Titans, and they didn't spend a tremendous amount of money on him, but it was a pretty sizable sum for Danico Autry, and he was going to be a key backup. A lot of people believed, myself included, he'd be the third defensive end for this team. And then he had the suspension. He wasn't in great health when he came back. He just didn't affect the Texans in 2024 like many people, including general manager Nick Caserio, who said he'd take him into a back alley brawl and he would take Autry into a fight, and he called Autry a badass. Autry just didn't showcase that and didn't have a lot of opportunities to always showcase that as well because of the suspension and just not feeling good and the success of some of the other players. And now Danico Autry is a year older, hopefully no suspension on the horizon, and he has a precarious fight to make this roster. He could save the Texans some money if they get rid of him, and there are younger and maybe more productive options to take snaps from Danico Autry on this team. You think about what Derek Barnett can do. You think about what Darrell Taylor can do, and you think about what a healthy Dylan Horton can do. And those are all younger players than Danico Autry, though not as experienced, but experience means nothing if you can't turn it into production on the field. So this would be an important training camp. And when you think about older player, injury history, missed time, and good young challengers for his spot, that's a recipe for a surprise cut. Now, if you followed along here on the channel, Danico Autry getting cut at the end of training camp won't be a surprise cut to you because we've been talking about how it could be a possibility, but some people will be surprised that Danico Autry can't find his way onto the roster. At the same time, he's a veteran. You know what you can expect out of him. And if he showcases enough here and there in training camp, his bar to clear to make the roster is probably a little bit lower than some of these other defensive linemen he's competing against. Can he be a force, a factor, like some thought he could be ahead of 2024? I don't think so. But can he be a solid rotational player, a player that you rely on from time to time to go in there when Will Anderson needs a breather or Danielle Hunter needs a breather? Sure, I do believe Danico Autry can do that. I'm not thinking he's going to get bumped down to defensive tackle much. I know that was a conversation point ahead of 2024. He really didn't do that much in Tennessee the previous years before he got to the Texans. I know that was a talking point for a lot of people, but it really wasn't a thing that they did that much, and he really didn't do it much at all last year either. So that's not really a big benefit to him. But experience and a lower bar to clear to make the roster, that could get Danico Autry on this Texans team. And if he doesn't, again, won't be a surprise because you've been paying attention here and we've talked about it. It will be a surprise when you show up with your brand new customizable draft board, courtesy of my friends at DraftKits.co. Get 10% off and use the code Cody25 when you check out. Customizable draft boards. That means when you throw that sucker up on the wall, you got that beautiful picture that you select, that you put in there. Maybe it's an embarrassing photo of the last place team from last year. Maybe it's you as the king of fantasy football land because you were the champion last year. Maybe it's just your team's favorite player in a legendary moment from that past season. There's so many different options, different sizes. Man, DraftKits does it first class. They're a Texas business. The guy that runs it is a Houston Texans fan, just like you. Take your draft to the next level and get a customizable, reusable draft board. Maybe you don't want to reuse the same one every year. They got the one-off boards. They got the 2025 version for you. You save a few bucks. And hey, if you got those customizable ones last year, like I was telling you, all you got to do is just buy the stickers and you still can use the discount on those. Visit my friends at DraftKits.co. Take that draft to the next level. Let's take the wheel for another spin and see who we're going to talk about as the training camp preview rolls on. MJ Stewart is up next, safety for the Houston Texans, or as I like to call him, new Eric Murray. This is a veteran that is on the depth chart that could get called on in duties if you have an injury to some of the starters at safety. And that's exactly what Eric Murray was a year ago. Now, Stewart's on the roster last year and had a little bit more of a special teams flair to his job, but he moves up the depth chart a little bit and he gets the Eric Murray role. This is a veteran. It's been around the team, knows how to play the defense, and probably shouldn't start. And you wouldn't feel great about him starting, but could he give you a snap here or there? Certainly. And I do wonder if maybe there's a little bit more MJ Stewart than we're expecting. That won't be the case if CJ Gardner-Johnson and Kalen Bullock are as good as most of us expect them to be. But Stewart is a player who had made his way onto the roster and kept his spots via special teams and is not a huge negative when you put him out there on the field. And familiarity with the defense is a big positive for him. That's an element that's a positive for him as a depth chart player. And the guys behind him, when you start thinking about who else can play safety, well, Jalen Reed, who's a draft pick, he's going to be on the roster, but he doesn't know the defense like MJ Stewart does. He doesn't have the experience. And, of course, special teams prowess is a big positive for a guy like Stewart, who's going to be on the depth chart for this team, not in the starting spot on the depth chart. So Stewart, I would tell you, for sure on the team unless something crazy happens. And he's that veteran backup that it's not the worst thing in the world. If he has to play a couple of snaps, you probably don't want to start him, but he's there with familiarity of the team and the defense in case you do have to put him on the field in defense. And then he's there as a special teams player that you can trust. The wheel spins and tells us who's next. Speaking of safety, now this is an intriguing case, an intriguing conversation to talk about here with Jimmy Ward. I do not know if Jimmy Ward is going to ultimately get an opportunity to make the Houston Texans, because it would not surprise me if Jimmy Ward is moved on from ahead of training camp. It would also not surprise me if Jimmy Ward is practicing, has the opportunity to make the team, and the Houston Texans let the legal situation that Jimmy Ward was accused of play out. The NFL has not stepped in. The NFL has not made any sort of declaration against Jimmy Ward and that put him on a commissioner's exempt list. And the Texans have not said anything about Jimmy Ward. So as far as I know, and as far as you know, Jimmy Ward's going to find himself with an opportunity to be there for training camp. Now, as I say this, and as you watch this, any moment, Jimmy Ward, the Texans can move on from him if they wanted to. And just to say, hey, that's not something we're going to deal with. That's not something we're going to worry about. But if Ward gets the opportunity to make this team, I do feel like he's going to be on the team, and he creates a really impressive backup and probably one of the better backups on this team from a football player standpoint. If indeed he is at training camp and makes the roster, he could back up two different spots, Jalen Petre's position down there near the line of scrimmage, and he can back up CJ Gardner-Johnson at safety, and he becomes sort of a super sub for this Houston Texans team. And with a limited snap count, with less snaps on his resume in the 2025 season, perhaps Jimmy Ward could stay healthy and would be a healthier player than he has been for the Houston Texans since he arrived here when DeMeco Ryans arrived here. So on the field, if Ward's on the team, he's a super sub. He's backing up basically both the safety spots and backing up Jalen Petre's spot around the line of scrimmage, that nickel safety or that nickel cornerback, that slot cornerback, a star linebacker, whatever you want to call it. I just call it the Petre position. He backs up the Petre position, and he was the first guy they inserted when they didn't have Petre there last year. Unfortunately, Ward got hurt himself, and the Texans were without that element of their defense down the stretch, and that led to some precarious positions for some of the linebackers having to defend tight ends. Remember Azeez Al-Shire trying to defend Travis Kelce? That probably wouldn't have been the case if Ward had been healthy. The big question marks for Ward always been the health since he arrived here, and now he's got the legal situation to clear up. And if the Texans will give him the opportunity to come to training camp and ultimately find himself with an opportunity to make the team. And I do believe if he hits training camp and he finds himself playing on the field with whatever happens off the field being settled down the road or in the future, then I do believe he'll make the team and be sort of a super sub for this Houston Texans team. Let's spin the wheel one more time and see what the wheel brings us here from a preview standpoint. Dylan Horton. All right, so a couple of defensive ends, a couple of safeties here. Dylan Horton. Of course, Horton was a fourth-round pick a couple of years ago for the Houston Texans and dealt with something that yet again popped up for the Houston Texans in their team's history. You think about the different players that have had to deal with some sort of diagnosis that keeps them away from football, from Quessenberry to Andre Howe. Obviously, what John Mechie dealt with, Dylan Horton was the latest Texan to do so. And as defensive coordinator Matt Burke talked about, the further Dylan Horton gets away from having to deal with his cancer diagnosis, the better he feels. And Burke said that Horton is more in or closer to the playing weight that he thought he was going to be as an NFL player and closer to just the physical readiness as a player. Not to mention, having that and getting that further and further away from you from a mental standpoint for Horton as well. There have been moments where it looks like Dylan Horton's got a little something to his game. There have been moments in his time with the Houston Texans where Dylan Horton showcased something. Now, can he harness that in this upcoming training camp, consistently put it out there and climb the depth chart to a point where when Danielle Hunter takes a seat, when Will Anderson takes a seat, Dylan Horton's getting that opportunity? I certainly believe he can. And when you think about the profile of this type of player, been around the team for a couple seasons now, so he's got an opportunity to at least have some knowledge of the defense. He's had some limited playing time in the defense as well, and now he's physically right. And it's a stiff competition. There's definitely competition to make the roster at defensive end. But Horton, if he could be a physical specimen, and maybe we haven't seen the best of Dylan Horton just yet. We haven't seen a fully healthy, physically ready to go Dylan Horton up to this point. There might be something there for the Houston Texans. I don't know that I'm going to sit here and be like, oh, well, when Danielle Hunter's gone, you got Dylan Horton. That's not how I'm thinking about that. But could this be a player that you trust to go in there when Hunter and Anderson take a seat? Yes, I do believe Dylan Horton can find his way into that. He's got to go out there in training camp, beat up on these offensive linemen who are going to be fighting tooth and nail for jobs. And when the preseason games get here, man, Dylan Horton, if he showed up and showed out in the preseason games, that'd go a long way to finding himself a spot on this Houston Texans roster. I'm pretty excited to watch Dylan Horton in this upcoming training camp. He's not on my must-sees, but he's the guy that's like, it's like a TV show that you heard about and maybe you hadn't watched the first couple of seasons and you don't quite know what's going on. But then you're like, okay, I'll catch it. I'll catch up here. And then you finally start to watch it and maybe it kind of hooks you a little bit. That's what Dylan Horton could be here in training camp for the Houston Texans. And my goodness, wouldn't that be a great story with what he had to deal with to start his NFL career if he solidified a spot here on the Houston Texans roster? It won't be easy. A lot of competition there at defensive end to find the guys that are backing up Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, but Horton can absolutely find his way into the conversation. You should find your way to the comment section with feedback on these players. You like Dylan Horton? You surprised that Danico Autry could be on the chopping block? Will Jimmy Ward get a crack at being on the Texans roster? Will he keep his roster spot ahead of training camp starting? Let me know in the comment section down below. On your way down there, thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't already, don't forget to enter the giveaway for Houston Football Appreciation Week. Thank you to everybody who watches over the course of the year. It's my week to say thank you. Enter the raffle. We'll have some fantastic prizes that we will give away to the people that enter the raffle. Bobbleheads, sports cards, restaurant gift cards, some Texans gear, all sorts of fun stuff. So can't win if you don't enter. Rules are on the raffle entry page. Appreciate you watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.